Welcome to the Audit Committee presentation. And go ahead and call roll. Smaller body here. Ms. Betty Burchett. Here. Commissioner Geragano. Here. And obviously, Secretary Hargett is absent. However, the body's made up of 3 people, so 2 is the quorum, so we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Pope. We'll call the meeting to order. Are there any other formalities we need to follow?
We did have one request for public comment by Mr. David Scruggs, and he's still on the line. He did ask, they're technically 2 separate meetings, and so he did identify wanted to speak at both. Mr. Scruggs, if you're still there.
Yes, I won't be redundant. Thank you for letting me speak. David Scruggs, attorney, Memphis, Evans and Petrie. I guess I'm sick because I do find the audit committee meeting interesting because you're going to go over the number of appeals outstanding. And our firm represents more taxpayers than any other firm in Tennessee, and we're very interested in expediting the process. So once again, without belaboring the point, I think that there are opportunities to make the system work more efficiently, and I've outlined them earlier, but I'll just quickly repeat them. To discourage and limit discovery, that's been done in other states. When you have extensive discovery, you turn the case into a chancery court case rather than an informal administrative hearing. Secondly, enact annual reappraisal. I pointed out to you that county boards won't hear a case while it's pending before the state board, so you end up with 2, 3, 4 years on the same parcel, and you have to have multiple hearings. And I believe the comptroller has said that he believes that that's a good suggestion. And then finally, though, the other one that's a little more difficult is the role the comptroller plays. And as I said, the comptroller intervenes, which makes it a 3-party case, or he represents the assessor. And I'm just thinking that if he would be more of a mediator role and help serve some of the Tennessee taxpayers, we could get some things done. But I'm encouraging you to encourage the state board, and I've had many discussions with Mr. Pope, and he's been very helpful. I think we've been very cooperative. But also, I'd like to have discussions with the Administrative Procedures Division and with the comptroller to see how we can accomplish streamlining this process. Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Scruggs. Appreciate you.
So our first item is just review of the meeting minutes for review and adoption.
Any comments, Ms. Burchett?
I make a motion to approve.
I'll second the motion. I guess we can take a voice vote. All in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
So right with that, the rest of I usually just present an appeals update. So I have our screen before you. You should have the slides towards the end of that packet in your binder as well if you want the closer up version. So as with every audit committee, I try to give you an office update, what we've been up to in the past year, what we have on the horizon, and kind of give you an appeals update where we are with our entire appeals base. So obviously you've already seen the updated manuals and forms from this past year. We've got upcoming rulemaking and then our appeals update. Sorry, excuse me. So we updated the forms. You kind of already seen those things. And then rulemaking is on the horizon. We did adopt our public comment parameters. I've received counsel that we do need to otherwise formalize those into rulemaking. And so we are in that process of trying to start that off. We look to try to hopefully accomplish that before our next audit meeting. And then also just updated some of our rules for value appeals, really just recognizing a lot of the work that we've done over the past year, the standardization of our scheduling process, how we work with APD, which is the judges' offices, and otherwise making sure that we put those structures kind of in writing so everyone kind of knows what they are. We've got some materials already on our website, but just sort of updating some of our rules to reflect that, as well as the sunsetting of the Assessment Appeals Commission, and that's like I said, our updated filing systems. With the sunsetting of the Assessment Appeals Commission, we currently have about 54 parcels. All appeal hearings have been scheduled for that. So we are set to wrap up business before end of fiscal year 2024. The appeals to SBOE, so we have one today, as you just saw in our regular meeting. There's a bit of a functional deadline for getting those onto a board meeting, because we want to make sure we give enough time for the parties to file any written argument so they can be included with your materials. Materials like you saw include any appeal statement, ALJ order, the technical record, transcript or audio recording as available, and then that letter from me explaining to the parties the next steps and how that works for appeal. I kind of just mentioned that because as the Successive Appeals Commission sunsets, you may see more of those additional appeals like you saw this afternoon. With that, we'll kind of get into our, diving right into our appeals update, as it were. We have our appeal. I always try to remind you that we have our appeal filings versus appeal hearings and kind of what that conversion rate is. Over the last year, we've really worked closely with APD to formalize how they receive our appeals. They loaded us up onto their software system, so now we actually have access to more data than we've previously had. And so on average, about one appeal hearing contains approximately 5 parcels on average. So it's not a direct conversion. The mode is probably still 1-to-1, 1 parcel, 1 appeal hearing, but they can go up to 30, or some of the timeshares you may recall were like 300 parcels, 1 hearing. But we're now actually able to track that on a statistical model to see kind of what the average conversion rate is. And so you see, for example, we had 950 parcels that refer to APD, but only 376 individual cases. So that conversion rate, as you see through our appeal statistics, just keep in mind that that parcel isn't by parcel. And feel free to ask questions anytime too, informal. So I updated this chart with our as of 2023. This is as of September 27th is when I pulled these appeal statistics. You'll see that on average, filed versus closed has varied wildly over the years. So we've got, 2018, we saw a lot of appeals, and appeals have gradually dipped over time, going back up a little bit in 2022 and 2021. We saw a great year of closing appeals in 2019 and 2020. And that is the number we are closely watching to make sure we are keeping pace with the number of appeals being filed. And so I will freely admit on this chart, you can see that number going down, and that is something we're fastidiously watching to make sure we keep track of and keep pace with. The same is still true. The vast majority of appeals end up in a settlement or a withdrawal in our process with me in my office with my signature on them, approving those settlements. And so that's what we saw that process first begin in 2019. And so 2019, you see that big jump because that's kind of when we first had that expedited process. And then we've kind of continued through that. And so we're hoping to see that try to continue. And I'll talk about how we're kind of doing that too in our next phases. This is the 10,000 foot view. First level appeals, that is appeals that are first going to the administrative law judge. Total parcels, that's the parcel count, is close to 11,000. Over 4,000, close to 5,000 are those timeshares where it's one property, one hearing, but consists of multiple parcels because every single owner has their own parcel ID. So what you're seeing here, to kind of make sense of it, we start off with 10,000, removing those timeshares just because they're voluminous, but otherwise, consolidated case hearings. We have our 9 non-timeshare parcels pending. So it's really about 6,000 parcels that we're looking at. Those are the parcels that we're all actively scheduling and working on. The timeshares are already moving towards a hearing. Close to over half of those are currently scheduled for a status conference with me, meaning they're in there, they're being actively sort of managed. We're keeping track of them and making sure they either go to a hearing or there's progress being made on those appeals, so they're not just sitting stagnant. Sorry, excuse me. So yeah, 1,700 are currently awaiting scheduling with me, meaning they have not yet been scheduled up on a scheduling conference. And I do a deeper dive that on our next slide. 283 are pending final results. So what that means is the judge has issued a decision or there's been an agreement on file. There's just a wait period between when they issue their decision and kind of when that is final for purposes of refunds and taxes. They may also potentially appeal, and so that's kind of what that body means. 177 are current work, or at least as of September 27th, scheduled for a hearing with APD, meaning they were scheduled for a hearing and they either had their notice of hearing already sent or are about to pen out, but they've been scheduled for a hearing. The parties are on notice. They've been through the scheduling process with me. We've selected a hearing date and they're on their way forward. 135 parcels were settled or withdrawn and are just pending an order, meaning they still submitted them faster than I can sign them. And then 25 had a hearing with a judge and are just waiting on that final decision and order.
Oh,
yeah.
I could ask a question. So, as I understand it, 6,000 non-timeshare parcels in this process. Can you talk about the settle? You said the vast majority will settle. You estimate how many of those 6,000, what percentage and process is for those settling? Do they typically settle before they're scheduled, or that kind of thing?
Yes. So historically, it's been close to about 75 to even 80% of appeals end up going through settling or withdrawing without having to go to a hearing. So it is the vast majority of those appeals. As far as the scheduling process, I don't have a firm number on that statistic, as it were. It certainly is not as high as I would like it to be. I would like appeals to be settling without having to be scheduled. However, part of the reason, over the past year, we've been trying to work on kind of our oldest appeals, working towards our newest. We finally have caught up. And so some of the statistics you'll see on our next page talk about being scheduled for that status conference is happening faster and sooner, and we've worked through a lot of appeals. And so my expectation is that for the most part, at least for the next couple of years, most appeals that are settling or withdrawing will have had some sort of conference scheduled with me. In my experience, if we do these conferences on Friday, almost every Friday, except for holidays at 9 and or 1 p.m., most people file up until that week, the day before. So usually it takes some sort of scheduling process to prompt it, and they're falling out that way. But I will be honest, I don't have a clear statistics about how many settle without that prompt.
Thanks.
The deeper dive of that level 1 of those numbers to kind of try to make sense of it more. Once again, we're kind of at that the 6,000 non-timeshares. And then from that number on that previous slide, what we're kind of whittling down here is those appeals that are pending final results or have been scheduled for a hearing or settled withdrawn or waiting on that final adjudication from the judge, that final order or the initial decision order, really brings us down to what you'll see in this third bullet point, closer to 5,500 parcels. That's after removing all the ones that are scheduled to close or otherwise moving forward. Of the 1,700 that are awaiting scheduling, most of them are represented by Evans and Petrie, one law firm. However, I will say it's not like we're taking it easy on them. They have just as many scheduled for a hearing as our next highest agent, and it's almost as many scheduled as any of our larger counties. They just happen to have a larger body of appeals, which you'll see later in the presentation as well. We have 105 where we scheduled that conference and no one called in for the taxpayer. We kind of tagged them as a no-call, no-show. We're working with APD to figure out kind of what the next step is for those appeals. We likely will try to give them, again, one less opportunity to sort of pick their hearing date or otherwise kind of to face a failure to prosecute or some similar motion to kind of work through those. Just making sure we protect everyone's due process rights and get those heard, but also don't let them linger out there. And then we had 113 file into September. Those 3 bullet points are the only appeals that didn't have a future date with me. So of the 5,000 appeals that we had pending, they all have a date with me. Most, as you'll see in the next bullet point, predominantly before the end of 2023, have some sort of follow-up. And I say that before we get into some of our later slides. The point of those scheduling conferences is to provide the parties an opportunity to schedule that hearing. To say, if you are ready to go, we have hearing dates ready for you. What's going on? And I usually tell everyone, ask the same sort of question. Are you ready to schedule a hearing date, or do you need additional time to prepare? And so for those appeals, we'll see in a moment, we're going through that process to make sure everyone has had an opportunity to schedule that hearing. And if they have not scheduled that hearing, it's usually because they are not ready to. And then you'll see from our non-timeshare parcels, Davidson County has a lot, Evans and Petrie has a lot, and then Shelby County is the next. That's a far drop off. Timeshares, this is the timeshare slide to kind of explain more about where that is pending. You get a large parcel count, so what's going on with those. They're currently at the Tennessee Supreme Court. There's a pending appeal. There's a pending petition for Supreme Court review. I have not received the outcome on that petition yet. There's only really 14 properties with multiple parcels and multiple tax years. Almost every single tax year since 2019, I believe, has been appealed separately. So they've been through peer hearing conferences are scheduled for October. We've started referring these over to an administrative judge. So that's the process. That's where they are today. I believe they had hearings between when I made this presentation and today. I'm not exactly sure of kind of the outcome of those because I wasn't at those hearings, but they have been moving forward with an administrative judge to have some more active case management and have any motions heard. Like most of these are going through a motion practice for motion for summary judgment. And so they have a judge who's equipped to handle those, and they've been assigned and referred over.
There's a petition for the Supreme Court to hear it. Waiting for them to.
Yeah, so there's all these multiple tax years. So the earliest tax years and the earliest cases are currently before the Supreme Court for that petition to hear. However, every year stands on its own, as they say, and so it's the subsequent years that are still in the administrative process, as well as all other taxpayers. And so I believe that to be one of the motions they may file is a motion to stay proceedings pending the Supreme Court outcome. But they will be with a judge who can kind of hear those merits, hear that argument, put that order in place, and otherwise hold on to it to make sure that that action happens as soon as we get that Supreme Court order back.
You is anticipated generally that that lead case will resolve it one way or the other?
I mean, a little bit of a rough spot. I do not, just because there are multiple taxpayers, multiple agencies, and I highly doubt someone wants to get tied by somebody else's appeal, as well as in the odd world that is property valuation, your facts can change from year to year, and so you could have a different justification for classifying them each year. It's possible. It is very possible. The parties have told me repeatedly that there would be a court case that would kind of pave the way for future settlement of these cases. However, I will admit, feel like I heard that at the ALJ level, at the Assessment Appeals Commission level, at the Chancery Court level, at the Court of Appeals level. Now we're at the Supreme Court level. So I don't have a lot of faith in that just because we've seen that. But that is what they told me. We have our pie charts, our lovely pie charts, and unfortunately our very patriotic color scheme of red, white, and blue. Most of them are commercial. They're predominantly all commercial. We've got some industrial, decent showing of residential appeals, but by far we're talking about commercial property when we come to the state board. Appeal type is the same. Very slim few of assessor appeals on a whole, but on average, they're represented by counsel or an agent registered with the State Board of Equalization are the predominant appeal types. So we're talking about sophisticated taxpayers with agents or attorneys representing them. By far, the self-represented appellant is by far the minority. This is the backlog chart, I guess, as you could say it were. This is by tax year, and then the next one we have is by length of time pending. So by tax year, you can see we're predominantly in tax year 2021. And then there's a very stiff drop off from 2021 to 2020. And so what we're really looking at is making sure that drop off continues as we move forward in time. We expect to usually get them. So I always say, for instance, it's October 2023. And so people will just now kind of be filing their 2023 tax year appeals. So for 2022, it was kind of so they're we're almost in 2024 was kind of my moral of that story. So we'll be in 2024 talking about 2023, and so it's kind of always a lag on tax year, which is why this year I included your next chart, length of time pending, to show you really how these appeals been from the time they were filed with the State Board of Equalization. And so we do have some laggard appeals, and like I said earlier, these are appeals that have had an opportunity to schedule a hearing, and we have not for one reason or another, typically because they have not, at least I did not understand the parties to be prepared for a hearing at the time. And then some of it is our scheduling process and just working through scheduling. But for particularly our older appeals, it's people who have had an opportunity for a hearing. And they're still working on the appeals, or there's some hang up on them. We're working with Administrative Procedures Division to find other ways to sort of make sure these appeals move forward. Most likely, referring them over to a specific judge for consideration. I'm working with them to kind of figure out how that process is, make sure the software supports it and it kind of all works, and we can kind of make sure that's a pathway that we can moving forward. But I think I did the statistics, and if we wanted to do that for every single appeal, we would need to have 5 different hearings every day of the week, all year long. And so in terms of the number of judges and resources it would take, well, certainly feasible, is not maybe the most economical use of time for when 75% of our appeals settle or withdraw through the scheduling process. So that's what we're working on. And so you can see that steep drop off. Between 1 to 2 years, we lose a lot of appeals as appeals get sorted out. Appeals by county. So Davidson County by far has the most appeals. Shelby County did a lot of work in the last couple of years to eliminate any lagging appeals, and otherwise has been on the scheduling process. So it's a pretty steep drop off. But most of them are currently congregating in Davidson. So remember the 2,000 number, we've got about 5,000 parcels. So 2/5 are in Davidson County. And then it drops off from there. Same for agents. So the fun thing I like to say about these two charts combined, about 20 people make up 80% of the appeals we have pending. These are by agent too, not necessarily independently by firm or tax firm. Other than Evans and Petrie's got one person listed as their agent. So it's a very steep drop off. So I think when I have in my notes here, but that we add them all together, it's 10 people do 80% of our pending appeals. So those are the people we see every week. That's kind of it for our presentation. I'm happy to walk through any other questions, any feedback you guys might have on that, or anything you'd like to see next year, or I can follow up with later as well if you want to see it for this year. That is the presentation. Mostly the last year has been particularly, I don't know, I'm a nerd about taxes, but exciting. We've really worked closely with the judges in APD's office to formalize and standardize the process for scheduling with me and then referring over for a hearing. So we've, APD's gotten more judges trained, they're rotating in more judges. That was kind of a big bulk of the past year. So looking forward to next year. And what's really exciting is now that we have that so well established, now the time that we can really come back and circle around those lagging appeals and really target them.
Thank you, Mr. Pope. Appreciate the presentation. Appreciate the you guys have done this year.
Well, I think that's the only other agenda item, so it's just adjournment.
Without objection. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.